People have been making stuff as human beings for hundreds of thousands of years, arguably. What is new about making, and particularly making in America, is the opening of spaces that allow everyday citizens to have access to tools that they wouldn't normally have access to. The great example of this historically in America has been the Homebrew Computer Club, which is where Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs started Apple. There were a lot of people from the Homebrew Club who really influenced American making in its digital form. As that progressed, we saw things like the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT and Neil Gershenfeld put up things like the How to Make Almost Anything course at MIT, which is an interdisciplinary approach to making not only objects, but what the computational interface with our objects looks like. And more recently, in the last probably 10 years, we've seen a plethora of community spaces evolve. Artisans Asylum in Somerville, Mass. is a great example. Columbus Idea Foundry, the ubiquitous stuff that goes on at Noisebridge in San Francisco. These are all really high-functioning citizen maker spaces in our country. We're really lucky here in Boulder to have Building 61 at the Boulder Public Library. There are a number of really great makerspaces up and down the Front Range, but one of the things that sets Building 61 apart is the fact that it runs a very, very functional wood shop with a highly trained staff, in addition to the regular makerspace offerings. So when we talk about makerspaces, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a wood shop? Are we talking about a car repair facility or a sewing circle or a computer hacking club? Well, Building 61 is a little bit of all of those things. And as we go visit Building 61 today, we'll kind of look at their interface, not only with the general community, but with people like Maker Ed and the education community, to highlight how they're training people, teachers, citizens, students, interested adults, in the tenets of making in our country. So we're at Building 61 at the Boulder Public Library today, and you guys want to introduce yourselves? And
Sure. I'm Zach Weaver, creative technologist at Building 61.
Adam Watts with the same title.
And I'm Janet Hollingsworth, also same title.
So I've been lectured in the past that this is an egalitarian and flat organization, so we have 3 of the finest creative technologists in the Western United States here, and what I think is a really, really rarefied atmosphere in terms of makerspaces, public libraries. You guys are like, you're it as far as I can tell. Can you talk a little bit about what happens here?
Yeah, so we really try to serve the general public to the best of our abilities, but we try to make this as inclusive of a space as possible by doing a lot of outreach as well. So we've got open studio hours where people can come in and work on their own projects with all the technologies that we've got here, but then we also do some focused workshops as well. It's a little bit of a blend of all of the above, and then our special projects include some really unique things like our apprenticeship programs and internships that are more substantive, pretty unique for a library because they typically span more than a week and sometimes up to 3 months.
Wow.
So.
You guys are creating physical products, physical, things in the world, and then endowing them with some kind of interactivity, computational overlay. Do you think that's like a theme for the work, for a proportion of the work that goes on here?
That's a really good question. Honestly, it's something that I think is inherent in the spaces. It always has been, from, if you want to go back to Noisebridge, or Mitch Altman is like an original kind of makerspace person in the US, back to Berlin hackerspace. Electronics were always a thing. They were always that kind of ham radio, kind of DIY electronics club. But I think you're familiar with SparkFun electronics. they sort of help the world repackage that in a much more accessible way. And so that's always been part and parcel of these spaces, I think. But I will, and I'll defer to my colleagues on this one, maybe Janet in particular, as the person that works with natural material.
Yeah.
I actually see that being a piece of it, but not an overriding kind of developing affinities for natural materials. My guess is it's because they've grown up on this this sort of virtual interface that's an analog of a digital analog of an analog thing for their whole lives.
So as you guys move through this, the lines are really blurred across what happens here, what happens in the community. I know that you're running a company outside of here. One of the things that's really interesting to me is that this is a very different space than many of the maker spaces that I see that are membership based. And can you talk about what those differences look like for you guys?
I suppose for us, the big thing is just making sure that there is a place for everyone here. We want to make sure that we're meeting people where they're at. We get a lot of real beginners that are coming in through the doors that have absolutely no underpinnings in any of the skills that we use to make things in the space. So it becomes a real, you know, a fun process. You know, you can have an attitude of saying, "Oh, you don't know about that yet," or you can have the attitude of saying, "Check this out. You know, are you ready to see this over here? Like, let's invent something together." And people can really take ownership of that process because you're there to help them.
And I totally want to add to that because I think one of the coolest things that happens is when we recognize that whoever walks in the door, they're an expert in something. And so what if we create an environment that's about skill sharing instead of we hold the information for you to learn from us? Like, that's not at all what it feels like in here.
So do you guys view what you're doing here as a form of engineering education?
Oh, 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think
citizen engineering.
Yeah, and down to the organization as a passive learning experience.
Well, and I think it's really interesting from our perspective, you know, from somebody who works in a very heavily defined engineering environment, that you guys all have technical backgrounds, very, very heavy technical backgrounds, but you've chosen this course that allows you to kind of transpose for a citizenry in a very you know, it's a very democratic presentation of the makerspace. I think it's one of the things that we find really interesting about this space. So I'm here with Zach Weaver, and we're in the lab portion of Building 61's makerspace. Can you take us on a tour?
So one, this is like where 90% of people enter the shop, and so to some extent this is the welcome room. We say hi, we really don't kind of throw anything at you. We say welcome to the space, have a look around, ask questions, be comfortable, open drawers, open doors, nothing's off limits. Some of the things that we try to introduce people to really immediately is our color coding system is there on the door. Around the room we just have a couple of good desktop workstations and a scanner. Behind you is a vinyl cutter that does indoor, outdoor vinyl, pretty large scale. And one of our favorites is a heat press t-shirt material. So that if people are doing like short runs on t-shirts or whatever, just a one-off, we can print a material there rather than go through the full screen printing process. We also set this space up to really be sort of a primer for what happens in the space, like what kind of media can we work with and what do some of those results look like. Generally laser cut materials, electronic materials, art and sculpture materials, textile materials, and then the suite of 3D printing tools here. And then this is also an access point for a lot of the softwares we offer. It's important for us as a library to offer things for free if we can. And so for 3D design, we introduce people to Tinkercad, really solid program, one of my favorite programs. For 2D design, we introduce people to Inkscape. Our e-services manager, Amy Schum, she's also our supervisor, has negotiated with Adobe to get Adobe design software kind of distributed, not just here, but throughout the library.
Very cool.
So that when people can't access the lab, there are workstations in the library where they can get their designs ready for laser cutting or CNC milling or 3D printing. So.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So Adam Watts, can you take us through and kind of give us a general feel for the space?
Sure. So we're in the studio right now, which is the largest room in Building 61, and this is where a lot of the action happens. So any given day that we're open, you'll see just people in here working on a ton of different tools in mediums uncounted. In this space, we have an awesome electronics bench, which is complete with diagnostic tools, soldering irons, tons of individual components, and a circuit board mill. Back in this corner, we've got a great textiles and fabric cabinet, which has 8 sewing machines, an industrial sewing machines, sergers, embroidery tools, and all of the individual components that you might want, from elastic to Velcro, to buttons to thread. Our silk screening area, it's pretty freshly set up. Back here, we have people printing shirts and posters. We've got our press, as well as a conveyor dryer and a variety of inks that are all available for use. And our airbrush, which is super popular amongst our model makers and folks who want to paint up their 3D prints or whatever they might have laser cut.
Nice.
And in the far corner, we've got 2 laser cutters. So these are both Epilog lasers. We've got a 40 and a 75 watt. They're probably the most popular tools in the space, though. At any given day, we'll see pretty much everything in action. There's just a huge sign up for those over the course of any Tuesday, Wednesday, or Saturday that we're doing drop-in.
Open studios. How many people come to Open Studio?
We might see anywhere over the course of the day between 40 and 100 people coming through the space.
So we're here in the wood shop at Building 61, and Janet Hollingsworth is going to take us through what happens here.
Yes, this is my favorite part of our space, and I think it's kind of what sets us apart as a library, because we've got table saws, CNC machine, drum sander, joiner, planer, edge sander, bandsaw, chop saw. These are things that definitely make a lot of dust and a lot of noise, not typically associated with libraries, but that's part of what makes it really fun here. People are working on stuff from learning how to build little tables, having never done anything before, to repair work, to our apprenticeship programs, where people get to spend 3 months with us and do some more substantive learning. And that's really cool, because I get to pass on the learning that I got from my grandfather to people that are maybe in a tough spot in life. So that's usually partnering with folks that are transitioning out of homelessness, and we're doing workforce development.
So Zach and Janet, tell us about this project.
So we launched the Little Free Library Project about a year and a half ago. This was one of our outreach projects, working with the I Have a Dream Foundation, doing an intensive weekend with students that had really never had any experience with CNC machining, laser cutting, fabrication, or electronics, soldering, robotics. So it was really an ambitious 3-day intensive that Zach and I and Adam were behind to really develop an experience where students would walk away with something that they made that's actually in the community. So when we talk about like having a portfolio and like growing portfolios of our community and our like the students that are in it, like this is so cool that they now own something that's out in the real world. So this is just one module of some of the little libraries that we made.
Inside there is a circuit that goes from a solar panel to this cool company called SparkFun Electronics. Makes this neat item called the Sunny Buddy, which is a power management system that goes directly from the panel through the circuit into a LiPo battery. And then that battery is just wired up to some cycling LEDs, which is one of the hot items for something other than throwies. So they built enclosures for those. There was the soldering team over here. The build team was working in the shop.
So part of the Maker Ed work that you've done is with Boulder Valley School District, is that right?
Yes, yeah, so we've actually done some work with Jefferson County School District and BDSD, working with teachers, school librarians, administrators, on talking about what is the pedagogy behind making and how do we actually incorporate that into schools in a way that's not just this add-on, or it's not an elective, but it's actually integrated into all of the subjects where everything is kind of messy and connected, just like it feels in here. And so we're doing a lot of professional development and team building workshops where we get dirty with teachers and really launch into that.
And Maker Ed as an organization has been a funding stream to help us incentivize some of those professional development opportunities, for us to document and report back to what we hope is that flow of information that ultimately gets back hopefully to the policy level, so that eventually on a national level we can start knocking out some of these barriers, including expense, and including curriculum, and including like the right to play, like the right to tinker. the right to have unstructured learning, informal atmospheres like going on informal education.
And we also know that teachers are experts in what they do, but there's a really synergistic relationship here where we can just kind of like loosen up, have fun, recognize the importance of play in terms of education. And, you know, and it's a little bit of both where we're really serious. Even though we're having so much fun, like the behind the curtains is, we're pretty serious about this. We believe that it's changing the landscape of education.
So I really want to take a minute to thank Zach, Adam, and Janet at Building 61 for sharing their time with us and taking us through the space and showing us the remarkable work that they're doing. We're really glad to partner with Building 61 on our outreach efforts and their efforts through Maker Ed, as well as the efforts that we do on a day-to-day and week-to-week, month-to-month basis, training teachers. And we think Building 61 exemplifies this model of building stuff and interfacing it with digital resources. So thanks for joining us today on this episode of Electric Field Trip, and we look forward to seeing you next time.